Hello, my name's Scott. In this video I'm going to discuss the cost of an extension as of January 2024. Now the house that's in front here, it's a standard house and I'm going to be putting a standard size extension on it. This is something that I commonly prepare plans for in my normal day job. Now when I started this exercise I wanted to set myself some rules to work to, which I'll go through now. Now all prices have been gathered from the web from various well-known suppliers such as Travis, Smith's, Screwfix, Wickes's. Now I generally took 2 or 3 prices and took an average. They may be cheaper, they may be more expensive, it depends on the location, depends on your builder's relationship with the supplier. I've based costs on metre square or metre run or per item depending on the element of the extension. I haven't allowed for waste. However, if you would, in terms of roof timbers, if you order roof timbers generally come in like a 3.6 metre span, where you might only need 3.4 metres actually cut for the roof rafter. I'll show all materials, their areas, their sizes, their lengths and their cost per use and total, and how I worked it out if necessary. The costing has been broken down into 3 elements. If I show you now, we're going to have materials in blue, our element in yellow and our labour in green, and then the total at the end. Elements are for things like diggers, skips and things that aren't included in materials and labour. The materials and elements I've added VAT or done it at cost VAT price where applicable. However, the labour I haven't included VAT. Now in terms of labour, I've based it on £250 per day per man. This is just an average I've taken. It might be more or less, it depends on the builder, labourer, trade, whoever's doing it. But to give us an idea of what it's going to cost, that's how I've worked it out. I also haven't included for a project manager, i.e. your main contractor dealing with the project, who schedules all the materials, schedules all the labour, organises everything on site and is the in-between person. And a couple of elements I've done comparisons on, so the foundations and the wall construction. Now in terms of the project specifics, it's a single storey rear extension to a detached house, the approximately 21 metres square of footprint, and the internal floor area is 17 square metres. Now technically this wouldn't need planning permission because it would come with a PD. If you want to watch my other videos you can understand the PD rights and how they work. It would need building regulations, so an inspector would come out and check it at the various stages, which I'll highlight during the video. Everything is standard off the shelf. There's nothing special or specific about any materials or anything like that. I've included an underground pipe, so a drainage sewer pipe, and I've also included an internal opening the existing house into the extension. Right then, if we look at the house, this is the front elevation. We've got our rear elevation, the alternative side, and let's have a close-up of it. Now the extension in question would look something like this. So this is 3 metres by 7 metres wide. 3 metres deep off the existing house and 7 metres wide. It's fairly standard brickwork, roof tiles, roof lights, bifold windows. There's nothing really specialist about it. All off the shelf items. So have a closer look. We can see that internally it's been opened up into the existing house. Now the first element of work we would do is to excavate. Now this shows us our extension here. The outline of it is 3 metres deep by 7.1 metres wide. If we excavated the foundations it would look something like this. This would also be the first stage when the building inspector comes out to inspect. Now excavations as a rule of thumb would be around 1 metre deep, subject to the existing foundations, any pipes within the trench, the ground conditions to which the extension is going to sit on. So in here we've exposed the existing footings, and we can see if we look at a section, so if a section of our house, that would be the depth of the footings, which is approximately a metre deep. We add our extension on, we'd see there that is ultimately what we're building, but our foundations would go out there and our extension would show similar to this. So we go back to our foundations. Right, then we can see the drainage in the trench. Now, in terms of the excavations, now if we look at, there's no actual materials on this, so we'll start at our element. So in terms of excavations, there's about 18 cubic meters of material to move there. That is the foundations and the slab preparation. So there's your formation, what's called your formation level, where your slab will be built up off, and these are the foundations, which are thickened up to take the weight of the walls. So the excavations, you'd need a digger for a day, which I found a costing of around £100 a day, and then you need 3 skips to take away that amount of soil, which would come to around £200 per skip, so we're looking around 600 quid just under. I counted for 2 men working 2 days at £250 a day, which works out to £1,000. Depending on how hard the ground is, what the dig's like, it depends how long they spend on it. It could take longer. I mean, they could hand dig it, in which case it's going to take a lot longer than it would with a digger. But based on this simple standard, we will probably look in under £2,000, so around £1,700 to get the foundations excavated. Now, as I mentioned, we have a sewer pipe running right the way through the trench. Now, I've assumed that this is a shared sewer which would run from one side to the other, maybe pick up the neighbours, and the pipe would run through. If we've gone through the standard water authority procedure and we've got agreement to build over it, they might put a condition on it, which means the drain has to be changed. So that pipe running through the trench would have to be changed and replaced with a new one. Allowing for that, I've allowed here, if we look at this section, I've allowed pipe, joints, pea gravel which it needs to be bedded in, connection. We've got further excavations to do, and then we've got the cost of the labour for doing it. So I've allowed a day for the excavations, and I've allowed half a day for changing the pipe work. So it gives us total roughly just under £500. So as mentioned, we've got the joints, so there'd be 3 joints and they'd be £5 each. A bag of pea gravel, I think we'd need 5 number bags of pea gravel at £4 each, so that's kind of how we've worked it out. Now, if there were more drains going in here, there might be connections going here, they might change this element more, there might be more to do, there might be a manhole there which might need to be taken outside of the footing, because ideally you don't want internal manholes, and water authorities generally don't accept internal manholes. So yeah, there are a lot of elements that could increase the cost of this quite easily. So if we go to our, now we want to find our foundations, so excavations. So now the next thing we do, we want to cast the foundations with concrete. So concrete now has been cast similarly level up to the existing concrete. Now the minimum you can cast foundation is around 8 inches, around 200mm thick, as part of the building regulations. Now that would take you up to about that level, but obviously that's still quite deep in the trench, which might mean the bricklayers are going to be down there building up quite a lot in brickwork. So if we looked at costing at this point, so we've got our, we've got our foundation costs here. So at 200mm thick, you're looking at about 1.5 cubic meters of concrete. That's about £150. However, delivery, if you're having like it brought by ready mix or somewhere like that, there might be a minimum cost of delivery, say £500. So that would be including that, whether it wouldn't, whether it would, that'd be something you discuss with them about how much you need. And I've allowed 3 ground workers 1 day to do this, to get found out whether it's being barrowed in or it's coming in on through a pump or anything like that, which again would be additional to it. So yeah, I've roughly estimated it would be around £1,400 to get the concrete pumped into there, or concrete laid into that footing. Now, as mentioned, if you wanted to mass fill it, i.e. put more concrete in, so there's less brickwork to do to bring it up to your floor levels, which is perfectly okay. For example, you could put 800 millimeters of thick of concrete in. Obviously this would increase the cost of the concrete. So we've gone from 150 to 600. So now that would make a large increase in the cost in price if you wanted that. However, it would reduce the time a bricklayer spent down in the trench laying bricks in an awkward position. Now in respect to the foundations, and that's what they'd look like. We've allowed a little section for the drain to be bridged over, which we'll discuss when we get onto the brickwork below DPC. So depending on the ground that you're building on, it might not always be normal concrete foundations. It might be a reinforced raft, which is concrete, but however it has got steel work in it. Now this is the same excavation, but this is included a raft. Now a raft is for where the ground is not stable, maybe it's fill, maybe there's trees close by. There's a number of elements, which means the foundations on their own aren't suitable because the ground bearing capacity of the soil below it won't take the weight. So in this case we put something called a raft on, which spreads the load all across the foundation. This can be fairly standard. They're used quite regularly in different areas. I used to do a lot in an area that was coal mine heavily. So there were a lot of raft foundations installed in there because a lot of the ground was very weak and fill and mixed rubbish and things like that. So a raft foundation is obviously going to add additional cost to the foundations because you'll be still using the same amount of concrete, but you'll actually have a raft foundation. So if we look here, I've estimated roughly what this raft foundation would cost in this size trench. Now, so in addition to your normal concrete, you'd have a steel toe, which is the lower section of the raft. We've got about 11 metre square of that, and then you've got mesh, which is the layer which ties into your floor slab to tie it all together over it. Now with the addition of the raft and the concrete, which is going to be a higher grade concrete specifically for reinforcement, you're probably looking at double the cost of the normal concrete. But as well as that, it may have to be designed by a structural engineer. There's also steel fabricators to do it, which need to fabricate the raft, or it needs to be fabricated on site, and then obviously the ground workers as well. So if you look in the comparison from the raft foundation at around, say, I'll say the simplest one is 1400 to a raft with the reinforcement in, you're looking over an extra £2,000 for that, which is quite a lot just in respect to the foundations. So it's probably worth knowing if it needs a raft early on so you can account for in that cost. Now further to that, there is an additional foundation solution where things are a lot more severe, and that's called piles, where basically there are concrete, maybe steel rods, which are sunk into the ground, drilled in, where it's extremely bad ground conditions. Now this could be trees or big fill sites, and you have to find basically a stable ground as deep as it can be, because sometimes you can excavate fairly deep to get the decent ground, but if it's over a certain depth it's non-viable to actually dig that deep, and it'd be easier and cheaper to do it this way than digging a 3 metre trench down to natural ground. So in terms of, it's quite hard to find a specific cost, but I did find an average for the extension size we've looked at, and this would be pile foundation for a 3 metre by 7 metre extension is anywhere between £4,000 to £8,000. Plus you're probably going to have to get a basic geotechnical report as to why you're having the raft and the design of the raft to account for the ground conditions. So simply we could have a very simple foundation, normal concrete, trench filled. We've got a RAFT foundation where it's reinforced with steelwork in the trench, and then we have a piled foundation where it's piled full engineered solution to a foundation design, which costs 4 times the original cost. Now that our foundations have been cast, the next phase is to start progressing with the build. The first section after the foundations have been cast is building up to your floor level or your DPC level, which is around this area across here. So if I add in some brickwork to DPC level brickwork, there we go. So that is your DPC level brickwork, which will be the first stage after casting the foundations. Now in respect to this, in terms of costing, we are looking at engineering. So we'd have engineering bricks. Approximately, I've worked out the number of them based on the size and area that we've got of around 1,300 at 70 pence each. So you're looking just under £1,000 for engineering bricks. There'd be cavity fill, which I'll go through in a second, concrete lintels, DPC roll and mortar to do this. Bricklayers, I mean, you're probably looking at, say, 2 bricklayers one day to get this up to DPC level. So in theory, getting your brickwork up to DPC level is probably going to cost you around just under £2,000. So I've got a couple of notes on here. I've got your concrete lintels, you'd buy them at a certain size, you need them for bridging it. The DPC comes in a roll, and the mortar, I had to work this out off the internet to estimate it with the raw materials and things like that. It was quite complicated, but that's a rough, I might be wrong, but it's a rough idea of how much it's going to cost mortar per square metre. So if we go back to our DPC level, so yes, so once the DPC level's been done, the floor slab would be cast. Now, when I mentioned lean mix, the lean mix is cavity fill, which goes into the DPC in between the inner and outer layer of brick, basically to strengthen it up because it's going to have pressure from both sides, and it also forms a bit of a tray for any water that gets into the trench to disperse away from internally. So it is faced like that, and it's normally around 225 or 3 courses below the DPC. Okay, so I can actually take away, let's get rid of the house and the landscape, and we'll have a look around the back of what it looks like. So that would be obviously your drain going through, your lintels over, your cavity fill up, and we've got our floor slab there. So let's have a look at our floor slab and the makeup and the cost of that. So a normal floor slab, you'd have hardcore, sand blinding, a DPM, insulation, concrete and a screed. Now this can be done in different ways. There's several different ways to do it. You might have concrete as the finish, so it'd be a bit thicker, and just have a latex screed on top. The insulation might be in between that. You might have underfloor heating over it. There's different ways to do it. There's also, in a lot of circumstances, there are 2 layers of DPM which need to be installed depending on the insulation and their manufacturer's recommendations of how it should be installed. So if we look at our costings in terms of the floor slab, so we've got our hardcore, we're looking at 6 bags at £85 a bag. We've got our sand blinding, we're looking at probably 1 to maybe 2 bags at £75 a bag. We've got our DPC sheet, there might be 2 rolls of that to cover the area. We've got our floor insulation, which say 100mm thick. The MOT was to be laid at 150mm thick minimum, your sand blind at 25mm thick, and then we've got our concrete, which would be at least 4 inches, more like 6 to 8, and then we've got a screed. Again, there might be a screed in different sizes. It might be a latex screed, or it might be a thick screed. You'd have the concrete and delivery element to be included, and in terms of builders to cast the slab, you're probably looking at 2 builders, a couple of days to do it all. So I've worked out to cast the slab, we're probably going to be looking at over £2,000 to do this element of work. let's go back to our slab. Slab. Right then. So once the slab's been cast and your floor slab and your DPC are in place, ready to go, we'd then add our wall element. So the brick walls would start going up, so obviously bricklayers would be on site, laying bricks and insulation in and installing up to your roof level. So as you can see, we've got our inner block, we've got our insulation, and we've got our external brickwork. We've got a beam lintel forming the opening over the bifold windows as well. Right, so if we have a look at costings, so in terms of brickwork, right then, I've based this on number of blocks that we'd use. So there would be quality blocks of thermalites that need to reach a certain R value, so the wall would reach a certain overall U value, which I'll go to a bit more detail in a minute. So we'd be looking at around 220 blocks at £2.70 a block, so we're looking just under £600. The insulation, again, we'll discuss in a minute because I've got a couple of highlighted areas here which discuss the difference in insulations. For a PIR insulation, which is kind of a Celotex or a Kingspan or an Extra Therm or Quintherm, or there's that many different ones now, we've allowed sort of 22 square metres at £16 a square metre, and that would be for a 100mm cavity. Bricks, we're looking at around 1,300 bricks at £2.50 each, so about £3,300 in bricks. A pack of wall ties, a pack of wall starters, cavity closers, a lintel, and again mortar. And it's estimated, I mean, it depends on your bricklayers. I could imagine 3 bricklayers would take about 5 days to lay this and get this up to wall plate level. And that would be at a cost of around £9,000. To briefly discuss a comparison is a wall construction, cavity wall. Traditionally, before June 2022, cavity walls are 100mm with fiberglass and plasterboard on the internal surface, were fairly straightforward. The U value was a bit lower. Following June 22, the efficiency was increased quite drastically, which means the insulation had to be upgraded. This caused various problems within size of cavities, the insulation to be used. So now we kind of run with about 3 different types of wall construction to achieve the required U value. So that might be with a rigid insulation within the cavity, and this is done with there's Celotex do one, I think Extra Therm do one, there's a couple of others that do one. So it's about 90mm thick, and there's a small residual cavity which allows water to get down. Some construction is done with 150mm cavity but using fiberglass. But obviously this decreases the room sizes by a couple of inches. If you change the block to a dense block, it would also decrease it by another inch. The other alternative, if you wanted to keep a normal sized cavity around 100mm, you'd have to use insulated plasterboard. But obviously insulated plasterboard is a lot more expensive than normal plasterboard, but then you're saving on the insulation just being fiberglass within the cavity, but then the insulated plasterboard is difficult to fix to. So each has pros and cons. A lot of builders prefer using one, prefer using another. So it's something to discuss for them. I'll go through the actual price difference at the end when I discuss the summary. So if we go back to our extension with brickwork up to wall plate level, the next section is the roof carcass. Now the carpenter will come along and obviously he'll fit the roof carcass. Now timbers, he'll allow for roof lights, fixing up gutterings, fascia, soffit, roof tiles, insulation, everything to obviously get the building actually watertight. So if we add our actual roof tiles on to see what it will look like with the roof on. So yeah, that's when it's fully tiled. Soffit fascias on, guttering on, roof tiles on, roof windows in, flashing kits, LED flashing. So if we look at our costs towards this. So we look at our roof construction, obviously there'd be a wall plate. So put this in the background so you can see. So we've got our wall plate. So we'd have wall plate across there, we'd have our rafters coming down, we'd have our soffit board on the front, we'd have a fascia on the underside, we'd have felt going across, we'd have roof battens then going across, we'd have our Velux lights fitted in, our flashing kits, our tiles, our dry verge which goes down the edge of the roof. Then be the gutters, clips, joints, ends, outlets, downpipes, clips, joints, lead flashing. In terms of sizes, I've looked at across here, so we've got the size of the timbers, we have the rafters, the size of the fascia, the soffits, the roof lights, per square metre of tiles, length of gutter, packs of clips, metre run. So once you've got all material costs, about £3,500, some fixings there as well, because you're doing roof straps on. I think we mentioned the wall plate would be strapped down, so it's all fixed. The sides will be strapped down to the sides as well, and maybe even built in with brickwork as part of the brickwork, and the insulation would come up, so it's all airtight and nice and warm. And normally allow a couple of carpenters a couple of days, a roofer, maybe 2 roofers a couple of days, fixing the windows, which probably come under the carpenter, but allow for that anyway. So in terms of installing the roof structure and getting it watertight, you're probably looking just under about £6,000, about £5,700, £5,800. Now once it's watertight, you would actually put the insulation, so we've got it watertight, we would then look at getting the insulation internally into the roof, so it's all insulated and warm. So let's have a look around, let's turn it around and have a look. Okay, so as a standard we would have insulation in between the rafters, leaving a certain size gap, which is about 50mm, to allow airflow over the rafters. And then there would also be insulation fixed to the underside of the rafters, roof insulation below, there it is. Now it can go with a specific roof insulation, or it can go in as insulation with plasterboard attached to it. There are different options, as I say, there are many different options of the way of construction. So I've looked at the roof insulation here, we've got insulation between the rafters, looking around 16 square metres, at £12 per metre, looking about 200 quid in insulation. The insulation on its own under the rafters might be slightly less than that. Insulation tape, if you were to have insulated plasterboard, that's a lot more expensive. So yes, yeah, because you're looking at insulation there at £7 plus £4, so you're looking around £11.50 per metre square. But if you're looking at insulated plasterboard, it's looking around 15 metres square. So yeah, again, this would probably be the carpenters who would install this, and it might be a couple of them, well, it might even be a day, couple of days, same rate to get it all sorted in. Next section would be plasterboarding the insulation. So let's have a look at the internal view. Okay, so have a look at there, we've got our insulation in, we want to get it in, and then they start plasterboarding it. So we can add a plaster to the roof and then plasterboard to the walls. And let's have a look at our costs in terms of plasterboarding. So plasterboarding, all of it, we're looking around 24 square metres in terms of plasterboard, so not massively expensive. Obviously if you use insulated plasterboard, obviously it is a lot more expensive. And then we've got jointing, which is sticking it all to the wall, the adhesive, and jointing up all the corners and everything like that. We've got the tape, jointing tape, we've got skim, and then we've got edge trims and everything like that. I worked it out to the size that we need specifically for this. So in terms of plastering it out, in terms of material, you're probably looking just under £600. And to be fair, it's not a massive job, so if it took 2 plasterers 3 days to do, you might be looking at about a couple of grand to get it all plastered. So yeah, also plastered, all nice and finished and ready for fixing windows and things like that. So let's get our internal view complete. So now we've got the windows fitted, we've got skirting on. So let's have a look at carpentry, which would normally be a carpenter who would fit the bifolders or a bifold specialist. So I've took an off-the-shelf pair of a bifolding section to around 3 grand. You know, you could probably might find one at 2, 2.5. You might find one at 8, maybe 9, depends on the quality you want. Skirting board, very cheap to get the skirting all around. You just need a couple of lengths because there's not much really there to tie into, not much really to do. So yeah, that'd take probably a carpenter a couple of 2-3 days to get sorted. So for that element of work, we're looking just over £3,500. So now if we go on to structural opening, so once the shell's done and looking at plastering it, if you imagine the extensions there's different times when they'd actually put a structural steel in into the actual property. So before it's fitted, obviously we've got a section of brickwork they want to come out there, and the section lower than this window. So in this one, we've just taken the bearing from the side of the one window to the side of the other door, and then we'd have a padstone and steelwork installed to that. This would obviously be designed by a structural engineer, and this would allow the opening to be opened. What's going on? Landscaping that keeps getting in the way. How is that? Boundary. There we go. Okay. So yeah, it would sit on, it'd be supported. Your builder would probably do this work, or your bricklayer, to get the actual steelwork in. So let's have a look at the cost of doing this. So structural opening. So the steel beam, I found looking at for one steel beam around that size would be approximately 450 quid. Might need a steel plate on it depending on the size of the cavity above. Plastering to include that in would be around 9 square meters, and then you'd have a couple of padstones as well. In terms of elements, you'd have acro pops, maybe a genie, maybe a fabricator, all this would be included. The size of the steel would generally be calculated at kind of pre-construction with the architect or structural engineer, whoever's doing it. It might take a builder maybe three men 3 days to get installed, and a plasterer maybe 1 day to get it plastered in. So at that size, I was looking something like an 8" by 8", which is 203 by 203 by 52 size steel at 4.5 meters. A plate to go on top of it. Padstones would be fairly padstones. As I say, this would be fairly standard stuff. So for forming that opening, we're probably looking over £3,500. Now, there could be additional steels to that. If you can see at the first floor, we've got an internal wall that might be load bearing, or the one below it might have been load bearing that was carried here if this room was split into two. So there might be an additional steel going back into the house, which would obviously increase the cost because there'd be another steel work to do, more steel pricing and things like that. So let's have a look at our complete section now. So that's the extension kind of complete. Let's have a look at a section of it to the floor. So yeah, that's what we'll be looking at. So we've got all this new additional floor space, which have kind of doubled the existing space. Let's have a look at an ISA section of it so we can see where it is. But yeah, that might be a nice space. I mean, you can have these piers taken back further. It would be down to the structural engineer to design it to the point of where it can allow it to go back further. You know, we can have steel posts built into walls if you didn't want any at all, but yeah, that is something that need to be designed specifically for the job in question. So let's have a look at our extension, and then let's have a look at costs. So I didn't include electrics or plumbing and that. So if you wanted to allow, say, plumbing materials, electric materials, say £250, I've done down here. I've allowed electrician 1 day, a plumber 1 day. So I've sort of kind of estimated around £750 per unit, i.e. plumber or electrician, to do this. It depends on what's going on in there. If it's a kitchen, obviously it'll be a lot more electric, a lot more cost. If you're having fancy radiators or anything there like that. So I've just got a provisional, so I've got an idea if we included like a minimal amount of plumbing and electrics in there. Right, let's go to our summary sheet. So obviously this is where we can discuss a fair amount of the stuff. So pan it down a little bit. Alright then, so obviously we've got a single story. We've got the extension size, which was 3 meters by 7 meters, 21 square meters footprint. We've got the internal size, which is just under 2.7 by 6.4, which is 17 square meters, and the wall perimeter is how we worked it all out. Now pre-build, you'll be looking at architect, obviously preparing the drawings for your builder to cost off, dealing with plan permission if needed, or prior notice application and building regulations. If you needed planning, obviously you'd have the planning fee. which is about 322 at the moment. Building control fee. Now, building control, you can use either private inspectors or local authority. You need to get costings for the size of the extension of either, but I would probably average around £700 for this. Slightly more, I think, for inspectors a lot of the time. I find if the sewer agreement was needed, we need now I know that my local water authority, up to a 9-inch sewer, we're looking around 170, no more than 250 for a sewer application, but as part of that they would probably ask for a CCTV survey. Now those can cost around £300. It's where a drainage specialist will come on site and they'll CCTV it to check out the condition of the pipe, if it needs changing, and yeah, that's sometimes when it gets changed, and they'll do one after to make sure once everything's constructed the pipe is in full working order. So pre-build, you're probably looking around £2,500. So in terms of the build, get a bit closer onto that. In terms of the build, so excavations 18 square meters, you're looking around £1,700, about 90 odd square cubic meter. Drainage replacement for 7 meters, you're looking about 450 odd, so £64 per meter run. Standard footings, we're looking, I think we said we've got 12.5 meter run of footings, so you're looking at about £1,200 in total, about a 100 meter run. Now the piled foundation, if you had to have piled foundation, that increases the foundation costs by 500+%. If you have a RAFT foundation, that increases just the foundation cost by 240%. So yeah, so the foundation basically, instead of paying 1,200, if you have to have a piled foundation, you'd be looking at 8,000. If you have to reinforced, like I say, you're looking at about 2 or 3 grand on top of it. Subfloor brickwork would cost around £1,700, about £143 a metre run. Floor space for the floor slab at 17 square metres, we're looking at about 2,100, so £125 per metre square. Above finished floor level brickwork, there's 22 metres square of brickwork, we're looking around just over 9,000. Now in terms of the cavity wall, these highlighted bits, these are the difference between the cavity construction. So if you notice, there's not actually that much difference between them. So the lowest one, which is the 150mm cavity, is 4,600, but the highest one is a full fill cavity PIR, which is the full fill cavity. Sorry, let me start that again. It's the fiberglass with the insulated plasterboard is the highest, but there's only £20 difference per metre square in each one. But that doesn't reflect the cost that might include the bricklayers, the time for doing it, because it's going to take longer to do the rigid insulation, where the fiberglass is easy to install. It doesn't take into consideration the decrease in size of the room. I mean, I know it's only a couple of inches, but yeah, inches will make the difference sometimes. And with the actual 150mm cavity, there might be a slight increase because it's a wider cavity, so your wall ties are bigger, your lintels are bigger, your concrete footings are going to be wider. All this, in terms of the material, sometimes not readily available. But yes, it's a consideration to make, but in terms of the actual cost, there's not that much difference. Right, in terms of the roof, with the Velux roof lights, we're looking about 22 metres square. We're looking around just over 7 grand for that, at around 325 per metre square. Plastering at 24 metres, we're looking around £2,000, so £85 per metre square. The carpentry for the windows and the skirting, which isn't major, looking around 3.5 grandish, just over. The internal opening, again for something that size, is around 3,700. And then, as I mentioned before, we've got plumbing, we've got electrics, just at a guesstimate at this point. Now, if we look there, the materials, all the materials which are worked out cost around £16,500. The elements of work for the hiring diggers, blah blah blah, skips and things like that, around £1,800, and the labour cost for that is around just over £1,600. So in total, we're looking around £34,500. Now, as I mentioned before, in terms of project management, that doesn't include, that's just labour. So that is you being the project manager, dealing with all the materials, dealing with all the scheduling of the labour and everything to come in. So if you generally employed a builder, they would project manage it, but you'd be looking at obviously a percentage which they'd include onto or would be part of their costing. Now, say stereotypical profit on things around 30%. So if I put in 30%, so 0.3%, would add on another £10,000 onto your total cost, which would mean this would cost, the build cost, being project managed by a builder who deals with everything, you'd be looking around £44,900, so just under 45 grand. So that would be looking at around £2,100 per square metre for an extension. Adding on to that your pre-build cost as well, you're looking around £47,447.59 approximately. So it is not cheap to do an extension currently. If you were to go up above and do another story, obviously there's elements that aren't included in there, so it probably wouldn't be at that specific rate of £2,100 square metre. You wouldn't have foundations, you wouldn't have drainage, but you would have more complex roof. You would have first floor, which might be, well, that's probably slightly less than the roof on the ground floor. There might be more structure and things like that. In terms of if you were to make this extension double in depth, so if it was 6 metres instead of 3 metres, effectively you're elongating the extension. So although you'd have the same, it'd be double the floor area, it might not quite be double the price. However, I can imagine it's not going to be far off, because if you made it 6 metres, that makes a far more complex roof, because you don't generally get rafters or roof joists which span 6 metres without being specialist. So you could end up paying a similar kind of metre squareage for that kind of price. So yes, at the moment, building extensions can be quite an expensive job. Now, this is probably about 25% more than pre-COVID from when I priced up jobs then and working on it. I wanted a comparison from then to what it is now. But yeah, it is a hell of a lot more expensive. So yeah, please have a look through. Any comments, let me know. Thank you for watching.